In October of 1883, a young woman from Boston arrived in Ventura, California with 17 cents a carpetbag in a dream that turned out to be a lie. She had no family left, no job waiting, no way home. The man who would change everything was sweeping feed dust off his boots across the street, and he almost didn't stop. This is a story about what happens when you lose everything and discover that losing everything was the only way to find out who you truly are. It is a story about a woman who arrived as a stranger and became the foundation of something that would last for generations. It is a story about a man who had land and cattle and a drowning debt and not a single idea how to save any of it until she sat down at his desk and rolled up her sleeves. It is above all a story about the kind of love that doesn't arrive in a rush. It builds the way a ranch is built, post by post, season by season, through drought and flood, and every hard thing the land can throw at you, until one day you look up and realize you have built something that cannot be taken away. If this story moves you, please like and subscribe to the channel. We tell stories like this every week, stories of courage, of second chances, and of the quiet miracles that happen when two people decide to face the hard things together. Leave a comment and tell me where in the world you're listening from. I want to know how far Vivienne's journey travels. Now, let's begin. The bench had grown hard beneath her. Vivienne Hartwell had been sitting on it since morning, and the October sun had long since crossed its arc over Ventura and begun its slow descent toward the Pacific. She was aware of this in the abstract way a person becomes aware of physical discomfort when the mind has more urgent troubles to manage. The wood pressed against her spine. Her traveling dress, a practical dark green wool that had survived 4 days on a westbound train, was wrinkled beyond any remedy she could apply with her hands. Her gloves, once her best pair, were now simply her only pair. She sat very straight. This was, she had decided sometime around midday, the one thing she could control. She could not control the fact that Mrs. Harriet Ashford did not exist. She could not control the fact that the position of governess she had crossed a continent to accept had been a fiction, constructed with impressive attention to detail in 3 letters each, progressively warmer, each describing the 2 children and the Spanish-style house overlooking the Pacific, with such specificity that Vivienne had never once thought to question them. She could not control the 17 cents remaining in her reticule, or the fact that the last train of the day had departed 20 minutes ago, or the fact that darkness was coming and she had nowhere to go. But she could sit straight. She had been educated at the P-10 Academy for Young Ladies in Boston, where Miss Sinclair, headmistress institution Unmovable Force, had spent 4 years teaching her students that composure was not merely a social grace, but a survival tool. Vivienne had excelled at composure. She had been in the quiet arithmetic of the school the girl other girls turned to in moments of crisis. Vivienne will know what to do. They had said this as though it were simply true, the way the sun rose in the east. She had believed it herself, or something close to believing it. Vivienne Hartwell had no idea what to do. The telegram was folded in her gloved hands, soft from being opened and refolded so many times that the creases had gone white. She knew it by heart now. Position filled, stop. No record of correspondence, stop. Suggest return. Boston, stop. Return to Boston. With what the small inheritance her aunt had left her, modest enough, had paid for the train ticket, the 4 days of meals, in this morning's stale roll and weak coffee, consumed with the absolute certainty that she would be dining at her employer's table by nightfall. She had spent the last of it on the telegram itself, hoping against everything reasonable that there had been some mistake, some misunderstanding, some explanation that the cold efficiency of a telegraph wire could not convey. There had been no mistake. She had been deceived. By whom and to what purpose she could not fathom. She had nothing worth stealing. The letters had asked for no money up front, no advance on expenses, no valuables sent ahead. She was simply stranded. 3,000 miles from the only home she had ever known, in a town where she knew no one, with night coming on, and 17 cents between herself and vagrancy. The station was emptying. The ticket agent had locked his window. The porters had gone. Soon she would be alone in the gathering dark, and she was not, she told herself firmly, going to cry about it. She pressed her fingers against her temples and tried to think. The problem with thinking was that every avenue she explored led to the same wall. She could not buy passage to the next town. She could not send another telegram. She could not eat. She could theoretically present herself at the marshal's office and explain her situation, but the thought of doing so, of announcing herself as the sort of woman who had been foolish enough to cross a continent on the basis of 3 letters from a stranger, made something cold and stubborn rise in her chest. She was still sitting there, straight-backed and dry-eyed and entirely without a plan when the voice came. "Excuse me, miss." She looked up. The man standing a respectful distance away was tall, well over 6 feet, with the particular kind of breadth across the shoulders that came not from any deliberate cultivation, but simply from years of physical work. His face was deeply tanned, the kind of tan that accumulated over seasons rather than weeks, and there were fine lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he spent a great deal of time squinting into bright sky. He held his hat in both hands. He had not shaved in a day or two. His work shirt was clean but worn, and his boots were the boots of a man who used them. His eyes, when she finally met them, were an unexpected color, blue-gray like the ocean on a cloudy afternoon, and they regarded her with an expression that was careful and direct, and she noticed this with a small, surprised part of herself entirely without pity. "I'm sorry to disturb you," he said. His voice carried a soft western drawl she had heard at several stops along her journey, Kentucky, she thought, or somewhere adjacent. "I've been working over at the feed store across the way. Couldn't help but notice you've been sitting here since this morning." He paused, seeming to weigh his next words. Station's about to close up for the night. Vivienne was acutely aware of how she must look. Rumpled, red-eyed probably, though she had been scrupulously careful not to cry, visibly lost. Every instinct her upbringing had given her told her to straighten further, to offer a polite dismissal, to handle this herself. "I'm quite all right," she said. Her Boston accent fell into the California air like a stone into a pond. "Thank you." "That was the last train," he said, not unkindly. "Won't be another one till morning." Something in her composure cracked then, not dramatically, not in a flood of tears, but in a small, precise way, like a hairline fracture in good china. She felt heat rise to her face and turned slightly away, pressing her lips together. "I apologize," she managed. "This is most I find myself in rather difficult circumstances." He did not retreat as she had half expected him to. He did not offer platitudes or grow awkward with her distress. He simply sat down on the bench, not too close, maintaining a careful and proper distance, set his hat on his knee and waited. After a moment, she found she could speak again. "My name is Vivienne Hartwell. I traveled from Boston. I believed I was expected for a position as a governess. When I arrived this morning, I discovered the family doesn't exist. The position doesn't exist. I've sent a telegram to confirm it." She paused. "I have 17 cents. He absorbed this. "Someone ran a confidence scheme on you." "I beg your pardon?" "Con game." His jaw had tightened slightly. "There's people who prey on educated women looking for work out west. Marshals have been warning folks about it for going on a year now." He looked at her carefully. "They ask you to send money ahead, travel expenses. Anything like that." "No, nothing. That's what I can't understand. I have nothing worth taking." "The scheme isn't always about money," he said quietly. "Sometimes it's about something else." He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read, something thoughtful moving behind those storm-colored eyes, some calculation happening at a depth she couldn't see. "What was the name the family you were meant for?" "Ashford. Mrs. Harriet Ashford." Vivienne watched his face. Something shifted there, small, quickly controlled, but present. "Do you know the name Abit?" "Can't say I do," he said. "Not personally." He said it the way a man said something true, but incomplete, the way you answered a question without lying about the answer you gave, only about the answer you withheld. Vivienne had spent 4 years at the Petin Academy learning to read the precise gradations of social evasion. She noted this one and filed it away. "Name's Cole Merritt," he said. "I run a cattle ranch about 5 miles north of town." He looked out at the darkening street for a moment, then back at her. "Miss Hartwell, Ventura's not the kind of town where a woman ought to be sitting alone at a train station after dark. There's a boarding house on 3rd Street run by a Mrs. Lang. It's clean and it's safe. I'd be glad to walk you there and stand, guarantee for tonight's lodging." Pride and desperation conducted a brief silent war inside her chest. She had been raised to refuse this. Ladies did not accept charity from strange men. Ladies did not put themselves in positions of dependence. Ladies did not, unless you've got a better plan, Cole Merritt said, with a quiet lack of presumption that somehow made the offer feel less like charity and more like simple practicality for where you're going to sleep tonight. Vivienne looked at him. Then she looked at the empty station. Then she looked at the gathering dark. No, she said, I don't. He stood offering her his hand. She placed her gloved hand in his calloused one and let him pull her to her feet. He picked up her carpet bag without being asked, as though it were simply the natural thing to do, and gestured toward the street. It's about 10 minutes, he said. Mrs. Lang sets a good table. You haven't eaten since that roll this morning, I'd guess. How did you know about the roll? Feed store's got a view of the station cafe. He said it without apology. I noticed. Vivienne fell into step beside him, acutely conscious of the curious glances from the few people still on the darkening street. A proper Boston woman walking with a dusty rancher. She could practically hear Miss Sinclair's voice enumerating the improprieties. She found to her mild surprise that she didn't particularly care. How long have you been in California, Mr. Merritt? 8 years. Came out when I was 18. From Kentucky, I think. From your voice. He glanced at her sideways. A brief smile crossed his face. Yes, ma'am. My family had a horse farm outside Lexington. My father and I didn't see eye to eye on much. Headed west and didn't look back. The smile faded slightly. At least that was the intention. She heard something in those last words, the particular weight of a regret that had been carried long enough to stop feeling like a wound and start feeling like weather. She understood that kind of weight. She had her own version of it. I never truly belonged in Boston, she said, surprising herself. I grew up outside the city. My parents died when I was 12, consumption. My mother then, my father 6 months later. I went to live with my aunt, who was kind in her way. She made sure I was educated. But the city always felt like wearing someone else's clothes. Too tight, Cole said. Yes, exactly that. He nodded to a shopkeeper locking up for the night. The street was quieting the last of the day's business, concluded the town settling into its evening rhythms. Ventura was small, nothing like Boston's pressing density, and the mountains rose dark and close against a sky that was turning spectacular shades of amber and rose. Vivienne had been too frightened all day to notice the sky. She noticed it now. There's Mrs. Liang's, Cole said. The boarding house was a 2-story wooden building painted pale yellow, its white trim clean against the evening light. Window boxes held the last flowers of autumn, and a broad porch wrapped around the front with rocking chairs. It had the comfortable, slightly irregular look of furniture that was actually used. It was modest and welcoming in a way that made something loosen in Vivienne's chest. Cole held the door. The interior was small and immaculate, smelling of ginger and garlic and something slow-cooked that made Vivienne's empty stomach clench with sudden embarrassing urgency. A woman emerged from a doorway to the right, petite, perhaps 40, with silver threading through her dark hair and eyes that assessed Vivienne in one quick, comprehensive sweep and found something they apparently deemed acceptable. Cole Merritt, she wiped her hands on her apron. You haven't come by in weeks. I was beginning to think you'd moved away. Never could stay away from your cooking, Mrs. Liang. He removed his hat. I've brought someone who needs a room for the night. Liang's gaze returned to Vivienne. Sharp and kind at once, the gaze of someone who had seen a great deal of trouble walk through her door and had developed precise ways of measuring it. My credit good, Cole asked. When isn't it? She looked between them. Come, you'll both eat first. Cole drew Mrs. Liang aside to the corner of the foyer. They spoke too quietly for Vivienne to hear. She stood by the door with her carpet bag and practiced the composure Miss Sinclair had spent 4 years installing in her, and tried not to think about how it felt to be discussed like a problem to be solved. When they returned, Mrs. Liang's expression had shifted into something warmer. Miss Hartwell, there's a room on the 2nd floor. 3rd door on the right, small but clean. You're welcome to stay through the week while you sort your circumstances. I can't accept. It's settled. Mrs. Liang was already moving toward the dining room. Now come eat, both of you. The food was unlike anything Vivienne had encountered: rice and vegetables and meat, in a sauce that was aromatic and complex, and entirely unlike the boiled everything cuisine of Boston boarding school. She ate with a restraint that cost her considerable effort, and she saw Cole's quiet amusement in the corner of his eyes and decided not to care about that either. "Why are you helping me?" she asked when there was a pause in the meal. The other boarders, two older men who looked like minors, a young couple, barely old enough to be married, a severe woman in widow's black, had their own conversations. "You don't know me." Cole set down his fork and looked at her directly. "I've lived in the West 8 years, Miss Hartwell. I've seen what happens to people who end up stranded in strange towns with no money. It's not a good thing to see, especially for women." He picked up his fork again. "And I can afford the room. The ranch is struggling some, but I'm not destitute." "Your ranch is struggling." He seemed to weigh something. "Drought's been hard. 18 months. Lost a quarter of my herd. The ones that survived are thin and I can't sell them for what they're worth." He said it plainly without self-pity the way a man stated weather. "I've also got account books that haven't been properly kept since my father died. Correspondence I haven't answered. Debts I'm not entirely sure I've paid." A pause. "I'm good with cattle. Not much of a businessman." Vivienne had looked at him. Something was forming in her mind, a practical shape, the outline of a possibility. She had spent 4 years as a student teacher at the Peking Academy. Yes, and she had taught literature and mathematics and music to wealthy girls who would forget all of it within a season. But she had also grown up in her aunt's small shop where she had learned to keep books, to manage accounts, to write letters that got results. She had skills, real ones. Skills that no one at the academy had ever thought to value because they were practical rather than ornamental. "You said you might have a proposition for me," she said, when we were walking. Cole nodded slowly. "I'd need to think on it some before I made any offers. But yes, I might." He looked at her steadily. "Could you meet me for breakfast tomorrow morning, 7 o'clock? "Of course." He stood collecting his hat, and Mrs. Liang materialized to show Vivienne to her room. At the door, Cole paused. "Miss Hartwell, I know you don't have reason to trust much of anyone in this town right now, but Mrs. Liang runs an honest house, and I give you my word you're safe here tonight." Vivienne looked at him, at the direct, unhurried quality of his gaze, at the absence of anything performing in his manner. He was simply telling her a true thing. "Thank you, Mr. Merritt," she said. "Good night." The room was small. A narrow bed, a washstand, a wooden chair beneath a window that looked out over the darkened valley. A single candle on the dresser. Vivienne set her carpet bag on the bed and stood for a moment in the stillness. She had been running all day, not physically, but in the way the mind runs when it is trying to outpace a truth it already knows. Now alone in this small, clean room with nowhere left to run to, the truth caught up with her. She had been deceived. She had spent everything. She was alone in a town 3,000 miles from anything familiar, dependent on the kindness of people she had known for less than a single evening. She reached into the carpet bag and took out the leather-bound book. Wuthering Heights, 4 years of boarding school and countless midnight readings by stolen candlelight. It had survived everything. She did not open it. She just placed her hand on the cover and stood there in the candlelight, feeling the familiar texture of the spine. There was a choice in this moment. She understood that clearly. She could give in to the fear, to the shame, to the voice that sounded like Miss Sinclair explaining in measured tones how thoroughly she had failed to demonstrate the qualities of a well-educated woman. She could spend this night in the particular misery of regret, cataloging every decision that had brought her to this bench, this room, this impossible situation. Or she could decide. She set the book on the chair. She sat on the edge of the bed. She looked at the window where the California dark pressed against the glass. She decided, whatever proposition Cole Merritt had in mind, she would consider it with clear eyes. Whatever work needed doing, she would do it without complaint. She was not, she told herself with a firmness that surprised her in its steadiness, the woman who had sat on that bench. That woman had been paralyzed by fear and humiliation. This woman, the one sitting here now in this small room with nothing but 17 cents and a leather-bound novel, in 4 years of skills that no one had thought to value, this woman was going to figure it out. She lay back on the surprisingly comfortable mattress, stared at the ceiling, and fell asleep thinking about storm-colored eyes and an incomplete answer to a simple question. The morning came through the small window in long amber bars, and with it came the smell of coffee and frying bacon from the kitchen below. Vivienne washed her face in the basin, changed into her one clean dress, brown cotton practical, entirely without elegance, and did what she could with her hair. The woman in the small mirror looked tired. She also looked, Vivienne thought, like someone who had made a decision. The dining room was already occupied when she came down at 7:15. Mrs. Liang appeared immediately, guided her to a seat, and placed a plate of eggs and toast and fried potatoes in front of her, with the quiet efficiency of someone who understood that the most useful thing you could offer a person in difficulty was food. Cole arrived at precisely 7. He had shaved. He wore a clean shirt, though his boots were dusty from an early ride into town. He looked in the morning light more substantial than he had in the evening, or perhaps she was simply less frightened now and could see him more clearly. He was younger than she had initially thought, mid-20s perhaps. "Morning, Miss Hartwell." He took the seat across from her. "Sleep well?" "Remarkably well, thank you. Better than I've slept in days." He signaled the waitress they had relocated to a small cafe down the street at his suggestion for more privacy and wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. "I'll be straight with you," he said. "You've had enough of people not being straight." He looked at her across the table. "The ranch needs help, not just with the cattle. I know cattle. What I don't know is the business side. The books haven't been properly kept since my father died 5 years ago. I've got debts. I can barely track suppliers threatening to stop extending credit, a bank loan due in 6 months that I have no realistic plan to repay." He paused. "I need someone who can organize the financial side of the operation, handle correspondence, work through the accounts, and help me figure out whether we're sinking or swimming and what to do about it either way." Vivienne was quiet for a moment. "What's the salary?" $30 a month, room and board included. If you help me turn things around, we renegotiate." She looked at him steadily. "I'll take it." He blinked. "You don't want to ask questions. See the place first." "Mr. Merritt?" She set down her coffee cup. "Yesterday morning I was sitting on a train station bench with 17 cents and no prospects. This morning you are offering me honest work for honest wages, room and board included in a household with another woman present." She met his eyes. "What exactly is there to think about?" A slow smile crossed his face, genuine, unhurried, reaching all the way to the corners of those storm-colored eyes. He extended his hand across the table. "Welcome aboard, Miss Hartwell." She shook it. His palm was calloused and warm. His grip was firm without being performative. "Please call me Vivienne," she said. "Vivienne?" He signaled for more coffee. "There are some things you should know about the ranch before we head out." He was honest about all of it. The debt, the depleted herd, the months of neglected bookkeeping, the two seasonal ranch hands, Raphael and Danny, who helped during busy periods but couldn't be afforded full time. He spoke without embarrassment about the ranch's difficulties, and Vivienne listened with the part of her mind that was already sorting the information into categories, already beginning to construct the shape of the problem. "Your father built the operation from nothing?" she asked. "From nothing. He followed me out west after I left, bought the land, started the herd. We'd just gotten to a place where we were working together instead of fighting when his heart gave out." Something moved in his face and was controlled. "Left me a ranch I barely knew how to run and a whole lot of debt from getting it started." "I'm sorry." "Thank you." He said it simply without deflection. "Then the housekeeper is a woman named Mrs. Reyes. She's been with the ranch since my father bought the land. She'll want to take the measure of you. Give her honest answers, and don't try to impress her. She'll see through it. And the ranch itself, about 1,000 acres, not all usable with the drought. The house is decent, 2 stories, solid construction. It's a working ranch, not a gentleman's estate." "I didn't come out here for a gentleman's estate," Vivienne said. He looked at her for a moment with that measuring quality she was beginning to recognize as simply the way he paid attention. Then he nodded once, as though something had been confirmed. "No," he said. "I don't suppose you did." They rode out in his wagon, a sturdy farm wagon pulled by 2 draft horses, her carpet bag loaded in the back, beside sacks of grain and feed. The road wound north through golden hills studded with the twisted shapes of oak trees, glimpsing the Pacific between the folds of the land. Vivienne had never seen a landscape like this. Boston's beauty was an indoor beauty, the beauty of brick and history and accumulated human intention. This was something else entirely. Wild, generous, indifferent in the way that large things are indifferent not from cruelty, but from scale. She felt something unknot in her chest that she hadn't known was knotted. There, Cole said. The ranch house sat on a rise overlooking a wide valley. The house was 2 stories of whitewashed wood with a broad porch and a red tile roof flanked by a barn and several outbuildings. A corral held cattle moving slowly in the morning heat, thin, as he had said, their ribs casting gentle shadows in the clear light. A creek wound through the valley floor, reduced by the drought to a thread of itself. It was not grand. It was somehow precisely what she had imagined. Not the Spanish house overlooking the Pacific from Mrs. Ashford's fictional letters, but something truer than that. Something real. Cole helped her down from the wagon. His hands were steady at her waist. She stepped onto California soil and looked up at the house and felt she would not have been able to explain it if asked, as though she had arrived somewhere. The front door opened. The woman who appeared on the porch was short and round, with silver-streaked hair pulled back severely from a face that was all authority and weathered intelligence. She moved with the slight stiffness of arthritis in her knees, but with no diminishment whatsoever in the quality of her attention. Her dark eyes found Vivienne immediately and conducted a thorough inventory. "Mrs. Reyes," Cole said. "This is Miss Vivienne Hartwell. She's going to be helping us." Mrs. Reyes descended the steps. She walked around Vivienne once slowly in the way that a person who has seen a great many things takes the measure of one more. Vivienne stood still and let her look. "Can you cook?" "Basic meals, nothing extraordinary." "Keep books?" "Yes, my aunt ran a shop. I kept her accounts from the time I was 14. "Read and write properly." "I was educated at the Peton Academy in Boston for 4 years." Mrs. Reyes looked at her for a long moment. Then something happened at the corner of her mouth, not quite a smile, but its precise precursor. "She'll do," she said to Cole. "Show her to the room off the kitchen." And just like that, with no fanfare and no ceremony, and no further interrogation, Vivienne Hartwell had a home. The room off the kitchen was small, a narrow bed, a simple dresser, a wooden chair beneath a window that looked out over the valley. Afternoon light came through the glass and laid itself across the floor in warm rectangles. It was, Vivienne thought, almost exactly the same dimensions as the room at Mrs. Leung's boarding house. It felt entirely different. "Belonged to my daughter," Mrs. Reyes said from the doorway, her arms folded across her chest. "She married 3 years ago, moved to Santa Barbara." A pause. "Nice to have another woman in the house." She said it as though the admission cost her something, which Vivienne suspected it did. "How long have you been with the ranch?" Vivienne asked. "Since Cole's father bought the land. 7 years." Mrs. Reyes moved into the room and straightened a doily on the dresser that did not need straightening. "Watched Cole come out here as an angry young man running from everything he left behind. Watched him try to become something his father could be proud of." Her voice was neutral, but her meaning was not. "He's a good man. Hasn't been easy for him." "I'm here to work, Mrs. Reyes," Vivienne said. "Nothing more." The housekeeper looked at her with those sharp, undeceivable eyes. "Good," she said. "Unpack. Then come to the kitchen. Might as well learn how this house runs." The study was a disaster. This was not a judgment. It was a simple observation of fact. Account ledgers stacked in precarious towers on and around the desk. Bills sorted into rough piles paid unpaid, and a substantial third category that appeared to mean unknown. Correspondence opened and unread, or read and unanswered, layered like geological strata across every available surface. Vivienne stood in the doorway and looked at it with the focused attention of a person who has just been handed a problem she actually knows how to solve. "I know," Cole said behind her. "I'm not criticizing." She stepped into the room. "I'm assessing." She spent the rest of the afternoon sorting. Cole sat across the desk and explained context as she worked this supplier, this debt, this letter from a cattle buyer in Los Angeles who had made an offer 6 months ago that was probably no longer relevant. He was, she noted, comfortable with her questions. He answered them directly and without defensiveness, even when the answers were unflattering. She was 3 hours into the work when she found it. It was near the bottom of the third ledger stack, wedged between 2 unpaid bills from a feed merchant. A single folded document, the paper slightly different from the rest, thicker, more formal. She unfolded it carefully. It was a contract. Voss and Associates Land Management and Acquisition, San Francisco. The language was dense and legal, but its meaning once parsed was clear. The signatory, William Merritt Callaway Ranch, Ventura County, granted the company a right of first purchase on the described property in the event of financial default by the primary owner at a price set below current market value. The date was 3 years ago, 2 months before Cole's father died. Vivienne read it twice. Then she read it a third time. She was aware of several things simultaneously. She was aware that Cole was speaking something about a fence repair in the south pasture, and she was aware that she had gone very still, and she was aware that the name on this document, Voss, was a name she had seen somewhere else in the last hour of her sorting on a letter she had set aside without fully reading. She reached for that letter now. It was brief. A query about land values in the Ventura Valley signed by a Harlan Voss dated 8 months ago. Cole had not responded to it. He probably hadn't read it. She folded the contract carefully. She placed it inside the cover of Wuthering Heights, which she had brought from her room to prop open a second ledger. Then she closed the book. She would need to think about this. She would need to understand what she was looking at before she said anything to Cole. She was not by nature an impulsive person, and whatever this was, this document, this name, this coincidence that she suspected was not a coincidence, it deserved careful thought before careful words. Which means the whole east section of fencing needs to be replaced before spring, Cole was saying, which is money I don't have. Yes, Vivienne said. Let's talk about the east fence. She set the book aside. She picked up her pen. She went back to work. Supper that night was simple beans, rice, cornbread, and the three of them ate at the kitchen table with the ease of people who understood that the table was not a performance but a necessity. Mrs. Reyes served and ate with equal authority. Cole asked Vivienne questions about the accounts. Vivienne answered them honestly, including the parts that were not good news. The bank loan comes due in 6 months, she said. Based on what I've sorted so far, you have roughly 40% of what you'd need to cover it. That's before operating expenses for winter. I know, Cole said, but there are options. Some of your current supplier arrangements are paying more than necessary. Your creditors, from what I can see in the correspondence, haven't been managed, they've been ignored, which is worse. A letter that explains the situation and proposes a payment plan will get a better result than silence. She looked at him steadily. I've written letters like that before. They work. Cole was quiet for a moment. You're not telling me it's fine. No, it's not fine yet, but it's not impossible. She picked up her cornbread. There's a difference. Mrs. Reyes, refilling the water pitcher, made a sound that was not quite a laugh. After supper, Vivienne excused herself early. She was exhausted in the particular way that comes from a day that has required sustained attention through sustained uncertainty, and she needed to think. She sat on the edge of her narrow bed with Wuthering Heights in her hands and the folded contract inside it. And she thought about the name Harriet Ashford and the address in San Francisco on the original letter that had brought her here, and the company name on this document, and the man named Harlan Voss who had sent Cole a letter he had never read. She did not have enough pieces yet, but she had enough to know that she had been brought to Ventura by design. Not accident, not random cruelty, design. By whom and to what end she did not yet know. But Vivienne Hartwell had not spent 4 years as the girl everyone turned to in a crisis without developing a certain precise and patient method for working through problems. She would find the pieces. She would put them together. And then she would decide what to do about it. She set the book on the dresser, lay back on the mattress, and looked at the ceiling. Outside her window, the California dark was full of sounds she didn't know yet. Yet cattle moving somewhere distant, wind through the oak trees, the creak and settle of a house that had been built to last. It was strange. It was entirely foreign. And somewhere beneath the strangeness, beneath the exhaustion and the fear in the 17-cent beginning of this whole impossible chapter, there was something else. Something that felt cautiously and against all reasonable expectation, like the beginning of hope. She was asleep before she had finished identifying it. The days that followed established a rhythm. Mornings, Vivienne rose before dawn to help Mrs. Reyes in the kitchen, scrambling eggs, making coffee, learning the small liturgies of this household, while the sky outside lightened from black to the particular luminous blue of California mornings. Mrs. Reyes taught her without appearing to teach her, simply performing the tasks and allowing Vivienne to follow. It was, Vivienne thought, a more effective pedagogy than most of what she had received at the Piton Academy. Cole ate like a man who had been working for hours before breakfast, which was because he had. Fence in the south pasture came down in the night, he reported on the third morning, accepting coffee from Vivienne with mud-caked hands. Lost 2 calves to coyotes. He said it flatly, but she was beginning to read the texture beneath the flatness, the accumulated weight of a man fighting on too many fronts with too few resources. Raphael and Danny are coming in today, he continued. We'll repair the fence and check the herd. Vivienne, he paused at the slight shift in his manner when he said her name, the way the formality of Miss Hartwell had been quietly replaced without announcement. The accounts, how are you getting on? Systematically. She sat across from him. I want to ask you something. When you ride out today, would you be willing someday soon to let me come with you? Not today, clearly, but I want to understand the physical operation. Not just the numbers. I can't manage what I can't visualize. Cole looked up from his coffee. Something like surprise moved through his expression, then something warmer. My father used to say the same thing, he said. He'd spend hours just watching, asking questions, trying to understand every piece before he made any decisions. The warmth dimmed slightly. I wish I'd paid better attention when he was trying to teach me. Well, then teach me, Vivienne said. And maybe in teaching me, you'll understand it better yourself. Mrs. Reyes at the stove refilled their cups without comment. The weeks that followed were the hardest and the most alive Vivienne could remember being. She sorted the study. She organized the creditors into 3 categories, urgent, manageable, and patient, and wrote letters to each category in a different register. The urgent ones got specific payment plans with dates and amounts. The manageable ones got warm reassurances and modest interim payments. The patient ones got acknowledgement and honesty. Results came faster than she had expected. The feed merchant agreed to extend by 3 months. Cole reported one afternoon reading a letter that had arrived that morning. He told me last month if I didn't pay immediately, he'd send the sheriff. He looked at her. What did you say to him? I explained that forcing you into bankruptcy would mean he received nothing. That working with you meant he'd eventually receive everything plus interest. Then I gave him a specific date. She shrugged. People respond better to confidence than desperation, even when the underlying situation is the same. Cole was quiet for a moment. You sound like you've done this before. My aunt ran a small shop. Times were sometimes difficult. She looked at the papers in front of her. I watched her do it. The letters, the negotiations. She had a particular talent for making the other person feel they were doing the sensible thing rather than the charitable one. Sounds like a smart woman. She was. She just never had anyone to tell. Vivienne said this without self-pity, simply as a fact about the world she had come from. Cole looked at her for a long moment. I'm sorry, he said, that you were somewhere that didn't see you. It was such a simple thing to say. Vivienne felt it land somewhere deeper than she expected and looked back at the ledger before her expression could say anything she wasn't ready to say. The account book, she said. Let me show you what I've found about the feed purchasing schedule. It was in the 3rd week that she finally asked about Gerald Voss. They had developed the habit of ending the workday in the study together, Cole reviewing what Vivienne had organized, asking questions, learning the shape of his own finances, the way a man learns the layout of a room he has been navigating in the dark. The evenings had a quality of partnership that Vivienne found herself looking forward to in ways she had ceased pretending were purely professional. Your father had business contacts in San Francisco, she asked. She kept her voice neutral, her eyes on the ledger. Some. He was always looking for investors in the early days, nobody bit. Cole leaned back in his chair. There was one man, Gerald Voss, came out twice to look at the operation. My father thought there might be a deal in it. Then Voss stopped corresponding, and my father stopped mentioning him. He paused. Why bowing? I found a letter, Vivienne said carefully, from a Harlan Voss, about 8 months ago, inquiring about land values in the valley. I set it aside. It didn't seem immediately relevant, but the name caught my attention. Cole's face had gone still. Gerald Voss's son. Yes, I believe so. She paused. Boy, the address on the letter that brought me here, the return address on the first letter from Mrs. Ashford. Before I left Boston, I copied it down in case I needed to write back. I still have it. She opened the small notebook she kept in her apron pocket where she had transferred certain pieces of information. The address was on California Street, San Francisco. Cole was looking at her now with an expression she couldn't fully read. And Voss and Associates, she said, is also registered on California Street, San Francisco. I found the address in a business directory among your father's papers last week. The silence that followed had weight. You think, Cole said slowly, that whoever sent you that fake position, it's connected to Voss. I don't know. I don't have enough yet to be certain. She met his eyes. I wanted you to know what I'd found, because it's your ranch and your father's name on that. She stopped herself. There are things I've found that I should show you properly, when you're ready to see them. Cole was quiet for a long moment. Show me now, he said. She reached for Wuthering Heights. She opened the cover and removed the folded document and laid it on the desk between them. Cole read it. She watched his face. He read it slowly with the thoroughness of a man who was making sure he understood every word before he reacted to any of them. When he finished, he set it down with a care that was itself a kind of control. He stood up. He walked to the window and stood with his back to her, looking out at the dark valley. Vivienne said nothing. She waited. He signed this, Cole said finally. His voice was level. 2 months before he died. Yes. He knew what it meant. The language is dense. He may not have fully. My father, Cole said, was not a foolish man. He knew what he signed. A pause. He was also sick and scared. And there was nobody here to advise him except the man who brought him the contract. Another pause longer. That's what Voss does, isn't it? He finds men who are struggling and isolated and frightened, and he brings them documents in the night. I think that may be what he does, yes. And now he's sent letters to the ranch, and someone connected to him sent a woman from Boston to what? What was the point of that? Vivienne had been thinking about this. I'm not certain. But one possibility is that whoever constructed the scheme wanted educated, capable women to arrive in this valley. Women who had burned their bridges coming here. Women who had no one to go back to and no resources to leave. She paused. Women who would be desperate enough to accept whatever arrangement was offered to them. Cole turned from the window. His expression in the lamplight was something she had not seen on him before. Not quite anger. Not quite grief. Something older and more weathered than either. You were meant to end up at his mercy, he said. That is my suspicion. And instead you ended up here. Instead, I ended up here, she agreed. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the document on the desk. Then he looked back at her. I need to think, he said. Of course, he left the study. She heard his boots on the stairs and then the sound of his bedroom door not slammed, just closed. She sat alone in the study for a while in the lamplight, with the contract on the desk between her and the empty chair. Then she closed the ledger, capped her pen, and went to bed. The next morning, she left a cup of coffee outside his bedroom door, strong with just a touch of cream the way he took it. She had been paying attention. She knocked once softly and walked away before he could open the door. When she came down to start breakfast with Mrs. Reyes, the cup was gone. By the afternoon, Cole was back in the study. He did not speak about what she had told him. He picked up the stack of letters she had prepared for his signature and read through each one with careful attention, signing where she indicated. He asked 2 questions about the feed supplier arrangement and one about a cattle buyer in Sacramento who had inquired about spring prices. At the end of the session, as she was gathering her papers, he said, Vivienne. She looked up. Thank you, he said, for telling me and for the way you told me. She nodded. I want to know everything else you find, he said. Whatever it is, don't spare it. I won't. He nodded once and went back to the letter in his hand. That was how it was between them, not in words, not in explanations, but in the simple, consistent fact of showing up the next day and the day after that doing the work, drinking the coffee, carrying the shared weight of what they were both beginning to understand they were building together. The drought held. The account books slowly came into order. The creditor letters slowly produced results. The days shortened toward November, and the California hills stayed golden, and somewhere in the accumulated hours of that autumn, Vivienne Hartwell stopped feeling like a stranger in Ventura. She was not home yet, but she was beginning to understand that home was something you built, not something you arrived at, and she was quietly and with great attention building. The rain came in late November. It did not arrive gently the way Vivienne had been told California rain sometimes did, a courteous announcement, a gradual gathering of clouds. It came the way a long-held truth finally spoken comes all at once, with a force that made the preceding dryness seem almost impossible in retrospect. It came in the night, and Vivienne woke to the sound of it hammering the roof and the windows in the parched earth of the valley, and lay still in her narrow bed listening with something she could only identify as relief. The drought was breaking. She didn't know yet what that would mean for the accounts, for the herd, for the bank loan coming due in 6 months. But she felt the relief anyway, the deep cellular kind that comes when something that has been wrong for a long time begins to be right again. She got up and went to the window. The valley below was invisible in the dark, in the rain. But she could hear it, the creek, which had been barely a thread when she arrived, already beginning to find its voice. The hills she couldn't see would be drinking. The cattle in the lower pasture would be standing with their faces turned up, their thin sides heaving, with something she imagined was also relief. She heard boots on the porch. She pulled her shawl tighter and went to the front door. Cole was standing at the porch railing, leaning on it, with both hands looking out at the darkness and the rain. He had not bothered with a coat, just his work shirt, his hat, and the particular stillness of a man for whom this rain represented something larger than weather. His hat brim dripped. He didn't seem to notice. Vivienne stood in the doorway. "Beautiful, isn't it?" she said. He turned and she saw something in his face that she had not seen before, not the careful control of a man managing his circumstances, but something open, something that was trying very hard not to be hope and was failing. In Boston, she said, rain was just gray, just wet. It didn't feel like anything arriving. She looked out at the dark valley. "This feels like something arriving." "It is," he said. He turned back to the rain. "If this keeps up for 2 or 3 days, the grass will come back. The cattle can fatten up. By spring, we might have something worth selling." The accounts would, Vivienne, he said her name quietly, not stopping her exactly, just saying it. She stopped. "Just for a minute," he said. "Just the rain." She came to stand beside him at the railing, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from him in the cold air. She leaned her forearms on the rail and looked out at the darkness and the rain and didn't say anything about the accounts. They stood there for a while. The ranch sounds shifted around them. Cattle moving in the low pasture, the creek finding its volume, the oaks stirring in the wet wind. After a few minutes, Vivienne became aware that the rain on her face was cold and that she had been standing in it for some time without noticing. She was also aware of Cole very close beside her and of the particular quality of the silence between them. Not empty, not strained, but inhabited. The kind of silence that requires two people who are paying careful attention to each other. "The accounts," Cole said, "are looking better." She let out a small, quiet laugh. "They are? You've been here 2 months. Almost. We had the same conversation the first night. The accounts are serious, but not impossible." He looked at her sideways. "You've moved us from serious to manageable." "We have. You've been following the supply purchasing schedule. That alone," Vivienne, again gently, "I'm trying to say thank you. Stop being efficient for 30 seconds. She looked at the rain. "You're welcome," she said, and then more quietly, "You've given me something too, you know. You've given me work that matters, a place where my capabilities are not decorative." She paused, searching for the right word. "I spent 4 years teaching wealthy girls how to discuss poetry at tea parties. They were perfectly pleasant girls, but nobody needed what I was giving them. Here, here we'd be drowning without it." "Yes." She smiled at the rain. "It's a good feeling, being necessary." She felt him looking at her. "I notice things," he said finally. The way he said it was careful, the voice of someone who has been deciding whether to speak for some time and has finally decided. "The way you work through a problem. The way you never let Mrs. Reyes win at an argument, but always let her think she has. The way you read to yourself, sometimes in the evenings, just moving your lips slightly when you think no one is watching." Vivienne felt her pulse make itself known. "The way you left that coffee," he said. She said nothing. "I want to," he started, and then a shout came from the direction of the barn. "Cole!" Raphael's voice urgent through the rain. "The creek, it's rising fast. If it keeps up, it'll take the lower pasture fence." The moment broke. Cole was already moving, grabbing his coat from the hook by the door, shouting back to Raphael, his whole body shifting into the efficient urgency of a man who had been managing ranch crises for years. Vivienne stepped back from the railing. Mrs. Reyes appeared in the doorway behind her. "Come inside," the housekeeper said. "They'll be at it until dawn." Vivienne looked out at the rain and the dark and Cole's figure already disappearing toward the barn with Raphael. She went inside. She and Mrs. Reyes kept coffee hot and lanterns lit through the night. They prepared dry clothes and warm blankets and kept the kitchen stove going. At some point after midnight, Danny came in soaked to the skin and drank 3 cups of coffee without speaking. At 3 in the morning, Raphael appeared to report that the lower pasture fence had held but barely and that the pregnant cows had been moved to higher ground. Cole came in just before dawn. He was mud-caked and dripping, his face gray, with the particular exhaustion of a man who has been working in cold rain for 6 hours. He accepted the coffee Vivienne held out to him with hands that shook slightly. Then he lowered himself into the kitchen chair, and Vivienne saw the gash on his forearm, a clean cut dried to dark mud mixed with blood along the edge. "Barbed wire," he said before she could ask. "Just a scratch." "Let me see it." He started to argue. She could see it forming in his face, and then the exhaustion won, and he rolled up his sleeve. It was not, as she had suspected, just a scratch. The cut was 3 inches long and deep enough to require cleaning, running across the muscle of his forearm in a clean line. Vivienne had helped her aunt clean and dress kitchen injuries for years. She went to the cabinet where she had reorganized the household's medical supplies in her second week, found the iodine and the clean linen, and came back to the table. She cleaned the wound without speaking. He sat very still. She was aware with a clarity that had nothing to do with iodine of the warmth of his skin under her hands, of the steadiness of his forearm on the table, the way he was looking, not at the wound but at her face. "Thank you," he said quietly when she finished. She tied off the bandage. She did not immediately remove her hands. Their eyes met. There was a moment precisely long enough to be undeniable and precisely brief enough to be deniable if either of them had wished to deny it, in which everything that had been accumulating quietly in the corners of their shared days was simply visible and seen and acknowledged. Then Mrs. Reyes cleared her throat from across the kitchen with the theatrical volume of a woman who had been watching this coming for weeks. "Eat," she said, "both of you, then sleep. The ranch will be there tomorrow." No. The storm lasted 3 days. When it finally lifted, the world outside was transformed. The hills had begun their slow turn from gold to green. Not yet, not fully, but the suggestion of it was there, the color of possibility along the ridgelines. The creek ran full and fast through the valley, its voice entirely changed from the apologetic trickle of drought. The air smelled scrubbed clean, like the earth had exhaled. Vivienne walked out to survey the damage to the lower pasture fence, stepping carefully through mud that sucked at her boots. Cole walked beside her. The fence had taken punishment, several posts uprooted, entirely debris tangled in the wire, one full section lying flat. "Weak to repair," Cole said, assessing it with the practiced eye of a man who has repaired a great many fences. "Can Raphael and Danny manage most of it?" "Some. I'll do most of it myself." He glanced at her. "Don't suggest hiring help we can't afford." "I wasn't going to." She looked at the debris-tangled wire. "I was going to point out that the lumber merchant in town has extended us generous credit terms since my letter last month, and that a modest additional purchase would not materially affect our position." "Is that accounting for suggest hiring help?" "It is accounting for doing the job properly." He almost smiled. "Fine." They stood together at the fence line, watching the swollen creek rush past. The morning light was doing something extraordinary to the water breaking across it in ways that made it look like something being continuously invented. Vivienne had been in California for 8 weeks and was still not accustomed to the light. "Vivienne," Cole's voice had shifted. She looked at him. "About what I was starting to say when," he said, on the porch before Raphael shouted. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to." He turned to face her, and the directness of his gaze had the effect it always had of making her feel that she was being seen clearly without performance or qualification. "I was going to say that I noticed things. I said that part." He paused. "What I was going to say next was that I've been trying to identify what this is. What's been happening between us since you sat down at that desk in my study." "Cole, I know you came here to work. I know I'm your employer. I know there are 100 reasons why saying anything at all is probably inadvisable. He looked at her steadily. But I think about you at odd moments, not just about the accounts, though those too, about the way you argued with Mrs. Reyes about the winter preserves and were clearly right and waited 4 days for her to arrive at the same conclusion on her own. About the way you write letters, the way you handled the feed merchant. A pause. The way you left that cup of coffee. Vivienne looked at the creek. She had spent her whole life learning the correct response to improper situations. Miss Sinclair had prepared her students for every gradation of social difficulty, how to manage an overfamiliar acquaintance, how to discourage unwanted attention, how to maintain composure in the face of circumstances that threatened it. She had a whole vocabulary for this. She found that none of it was available to her. I think about you too, she said. Her voice was quieter than she intended. More than I should. Cole was still, a ranch hand kind of still, the trained waiting stillness of someone who knows that the next moment will determine a great deal. So what do we do about it? He asked. I don't know. She turned to look at him. There was no one in Boston. No one I thought of that way. She felt the heat rise to her face and did not look away. I don't have a script for this. Something softened in him. She saw it happen, a careful lowering of something that had been held up for a long time. Neither do I, he said. I had one plan when I came west, and it was to build something. I didn't plan for any of this. He reached out slowly and with the carefulness of a man giving a person every possible moment to step back. When she didn't, he took her hand. His palm was warm and rough and steady. I'm not asking for promises. I'm asking if you'd be willing to spend some time finding out what this is, properly, without rushing it. She looked at their joined hands, the contrast of his sun-darkened skin against hers, the calluses where his met the softness where hers did. Yes, she said simply. He raised her hand to his lips and pressed a brief, formal kiss against her knuckles. Old-fashioned, unhurried, entirely sincere, and she felt it go all the way through her in a way that no elaborate gesture could have achieved. Then we'll go slowly, he said. Do this right. They walked back to the ranch house hand in hand, and if Mrs. Reyes happened to be standing at the kitchen window when they came up the path, she had the good grace to be looking at something else entirely by the time they came through the door. The weeks that followed had a quality of ordinary joy that Vivienne had never experienced before. Not the performative joy of Boston society events, not the anxious joy of a schoolgirl who has received good marks. The quiet, daily, unremarkable treat of a life that was working of waking up in the morning and knowing what the day held and finding that what it held was sufficient. Cole courted her as he had promised properly. Sunday afternoons became theirs, long walks along the creek when the weather allowed, long conversations on the porch when it didn't. He brought her wildflowers from the hills, the kind that had no formal names, that either of them knew just colors and shapes and the particular way they looked when he held them out with a casualness that she understood was not casual at all. She read to him in the evenings, Wuthering Heights at first, then a novel of Dickens she had borrowed from Mrs. Ling's small library, while he repaired equipment or worked leather at the other end of the kitchen table, half his attention on the work and half on her voice. They talked about everything. Tell me about your mother, Vivienne said one afternoon as they sat by the creek, the December sun warm against the residual cold. Before your father, before Kentucky. Cole was quiet for a moment, turning a flat stone over in his hand. She was the one who kept peace between us, he said. My father and I were too much alike to get along. She understood that. Understood us both. He smiled at some interior image. She used to take me riding before sunrise, just the two of us racing across the fields. She'd let me win sometimes, but not always. Said I needed to learn that losing with grace was as important as winning with humility. How old were you when she died? 14, fever, 3 days. He set the stone down carefully. After that, my father and I just collided. Constantly. He had a picture of what I was supposed to become, and I had a different picture, and neither of us knew how to hold both pictures in the same room. He paused. It took me 8 years and 3,000 miles to understand what he'd been trying to teach me. Vivienne slipped her hand into his. He'd be proud, she said, of what you're building. I hope so. He looked at their joined hands. I think he'd have liked you. Do you? He'd have respected you. That was his version of like. Cole looked at her sideways, and there was something in the expression, a quiet wonder almost at the fact of her, that she found she couldn't look at directly for very long without feeling something shift in her chest. My mother would have loved you. She always said I needed someone stubborn enough to stand up to me when I was being foolish. Am I going to have to do that often? Probably. He grinned. I've been told I can be remarkably difficult. Told by whom? You mostly. Also Mrs. Reyes, Raphael, Danny, essentially everyone who has spent more than a week in my company. She laughed, and the sound of it carried across the valley in the still afternoon air. And Cole looked at her with an expression that she finally had allowed herself to name, not analyzed, not cataloged, not filed away, simply named quietly to herself. He kissed her then in the fading winter light beside the restored creek gently and without ceremony, and Vivienne felt the last of the rigid, careful architecture Miss Sinclair had spent 4 years constructing around her heart simply release. Not collapse. Release. The way a fist opens when it finally has something worth holding. Christmas came with quiet sweetness. Mrs. Reyes roasted a chicken and made her special flan, a recipe from her own mother she explained from a town in Mexico whose name she said only once and did not repeat. Vivienne contributed her mother's recipe for spiced cider and sugar cookies shaped like stars. Cole cut a small tree from the hillside and set it in the parlor, which was used for the first time since Vivienne could remember. They sat together after supper, con Vivienne, Mrs. Reyes, Raphael, and Danny, around the kitchen table in the lamplight, and Vivienne looked at the faces around her and felt something she had been trying to name for weeks finally yield its name. Family. Not the family she had come from, those careful formal arrangements that had sustained her without warming her. This kind, chosen particular, accumulated from the specific materials of shared difficulty and shared work in the daily practice of choosing to show up for each other. Cole gave her a leather-bound journal, plain and practical, intended for ranch records, but he had pressed a small sprig of dried wildflower inside the front cover, one of the nameless ones he brought her on Sundays. She gave him new work gloves she had sewn herself, the lining stitched from wool she had purchased with her first month's wages, and she had embroidered a single small M on the inside cuff where no one else would see it. He found it while putting them on. He looked at it for a long moment, then he looked at her. He didn't say anything, but he wore the gloves every day after that, even when the work didn't strictly require them. January arrived. With it came the results of the careful work of the previous months, not triumphantly, not all at once, but in the accumulating way of honest effort, a payment plan successfully completed with the feed merchant, a letter from the Sacramento cattle buyer expressing serious interest in their spring herd, a reduced interest rate negotiated with the bank's representative by a letter Vivienne had written and rewritten 5 times. We're going to make it, Cole said one evening in late January, reviewing the updated projections she had prepared. He said it with the careful provisional quality of a man who had been wrong about this before and was not going to be reckless with hope. We might, Vivienne said, if the herd fattens on the spring grass as projected, and if we can hold the spring sale price above a certain threshold. We're going to make it, he said again. She looked at the numbers. Yes, she agreed. I think we are. He was looking at her with an intensity that she was still, after months, adjusting to the directness of it, the way he didn't soften his attention for the sake of social comfort. Vivienne, he said. Cole, let me. He stood and came around the desk, and she rose to meet him, and they stood facing each other in the lamplight, with the account ledgers open between them. When I found you on that bench, he said, I was acting on instinct. Something in you that looked like someone who was supposed to be somewhere else. I don't know how to explain it better than that. He reached up and held her face in both hands with the same careful attention he gave to every important thing. You've saved this ranch, that's true. But more than that, you've saved me from something I didn't even know was happening, from disappearing into the work, into the debt, into the grief about my father, from becoming someone who had land and cattle and nothing else. Cole, her voice was unsteady in a way she didn't try to control. I'm in love with you, he said. I have been for a while. I think I was a little when you said you'd take the moss without even asking to see the place first. A slight smile. It was the most impractical thing I'd ever seen a practical person do. She let out a breath that was almost a laugh. I was terrified, she said. The whole wagon ride out. You didn't show it. I was very focused on not showing it. Are you terrified now? She looked at him, at the careful, earnest quality of his face, at the man who had seen her, not the Boston girl, or the charity case, or the governess who never was, but the person who could organize an account book and write a letter that changed a creditor's mind and leave a cup of coffee outside a closed door at exactly the right moment. No, she said. I love you too, she said. I have for longer than I acknowledged. He kissed her then, not gently, this time not with the carefulness of someone gauging how much was welcome, with the directness of a man who has finally said the true thing and means to stand behind it. When they finally separated, she could hear Mrs. Reyes in the kitchen ostentatiously moving things around, making far more noise with the dishes than any routine cleaning required. She's going to be insufferable about this, Vivienne said. She absolutely is. She told me I was falling for you in November. She told me the same thing in October. They went to the kitchen hand in hand. Mrs. Reyes was standing at the counter, her back to them, moving a pot from one side of the stove to the other with elaborate casualness. 3 cups of cocoa sat on the table already poured. Took you long enough, she said without turning around. She brought the pot to the table and sat down across from them. Her eyes were bright in a way that Vivienne suspected she would not tomorrow acknowledge. They drank their cocoa in the quiet kitchen while the January rain drummed against the windows, and Vivienne sat between Cole and Mrs. Reyes and felt the shape of her life settle into something she recognized. Spring came to the Ventura Valley like a promise kept. The winter rains had done their work. The hills were green, now genuinely deeply green, the color of recovery. The creek ran full and clear. The cattle were visibly improved, their thin sides filling the calves born in late winter, already finding their legs with increasing confidence in the lush new grass. The accounts reflected this. The spring cattle sale, when it came, was the first genuine good news the ranch had seen in 2 years. Nathan arrived at the sale yard with healthy, well-fed animals and the quiet confidence of a man who knew their value and was not going to apologize for it. Vivienne stood to the side and watched him negotiate with buyers and saw something she had not seen in October, the ease of a man operating within his capabilities rather than in spite of his limitations. He knew his cattle. He always had. He simply knew the business side of them now as well. Remarkable turnaround, Mr. Merritt, the bank representative, Mr. Doyle, said when they presented the spring payment. The man was perhaps 60, with the measured manner of someone who had made a career of never being surprised by anything and occasionally succeeded. If you continue at this rate, the loan could be discharged ahead of the original schedule. That's the plan, Cole said. His hand found Vivienne's under the table briefly, the way it did sometimes now when something went right. And may I say, Mr. Doyle continued with the delicacy of a man navigating unfamiliar territory, that the quality of your correspondence and account keeping has improved considerably over the past year. The bank has noted it. Miss Hartwell manages the business operations, Cole said. I manage the cattle. Mr. Doyle looked at Vivienne with a careful professional reassessment. Indeed, he said, I expect we'll be hearing more from the Merritt Ranch. You will, Vivienne said pleasantly. It was the week before the wedding that Harlan Voss arrived. He came in a carriage, a good one with matched horses, and a driver in a formal coat that was conspicuously out of place on the ranch road. He was perhaps 45, with the polished ease of a man who had made a great deal of money in ways that did not require physical labor. His suit was excellent. His hands were soft. He walked up to the porch as though he had made an appointment. Cole met him in the yard. Vivienne stood on the porch and watched. Mr. Merritt, Voss offered his hand. His voice was smooth, practiced. Harlan Voss, I've been meaning to call for some time. I represent certain investment interests in this valley. I know who you are, Cole said. He shook the hand with the measured politeness of a man who has decided to see what the other man says before he says what he himself knows. Voss smiled. The smile did not reach his eyes. I've had my eye on this property for a while. The location, the creek access, the road to the coast, it's an exceptional piece of land. I'd like to make you an offer. He named a figure. Cole was quiet for a moment. The ranch isn't for sale, he said. That figure represents... I heard it. Cole's voice had not changed. The ranch isn't for sale. Voss's gaze moved to Vivienne on the porch. It was an assessing gaze, measuring, calculating the gaze of a man who was accustomed to identifying leverage. She watched him identify it. She watched the thought form behind his eyes. "Is this the young lady I've heard about?" he said. "The one who came out from Boston?" His voice was warm, with a warmth that was entirely manufactured. It must have been quite an adjustment, coming all this way on the basis of, well, he spread his hands in a gesture of sympathetic wonder, on the basis of a position that didn't quite materialize. Vivienne looked at him steadily. She felt the threat beneath the words with perfect clarity. He knew about the Ashford scheme. He was telling her he knew. He was telling Cole by implication that she was a vulnerability he could use. She had been preparing for this moment in some way since October. "Mr. Voss," she said, "Mr. Merritt has given you his answer. Is there anything else you needed?" Something flickered in Voss's expression, surprise, then recalibration. "I'm sure we'll have occasion to speak again," he said pleasantly. He nodded to Cole. "Think about the offer, Mr. Merritt. It won't be on the table indefinitely." He returned to his carriage. He did not look back. When the carriage had gone, Cole came up the porch steps and stood beside Vivienne. "He knows about the scheme," she said quietly. "Yes. He was trying to tell me that he could use it against you, that I'm a liability." "I know what he was trying to tell you." Cole looked at her directly. "Are you?" She met his eyes. "No." "No," he agreed. Mrs. Reyes appeared in the doorway. She had been listening from inside. Vivienne suspected since the carriage appeared on the road. "Come inside," she said. "Both of you, we have a wedding to plan." Bye. That evening after supper, Cole spread Owen Marsh's card on the kitchen table. Owen Marsh was 28 years old, recently arrived from Sacramento, with the slightly rumpled air of a man who had very good ideas and not yet enough clients to demonstrate them. He had a small office above the hardware store on Main Street, and he had been recommended to Cole by Mr. Doyley at the bank, who had described him as sharp, which is what you want, and hungry, which is what makes sharp useful. Vivienne had already been to see him once alone about the contract she had found in Cole's father's papers. "I've been doing some research," Owen had told her, his voice carefully even. "Voss and Associates has a pattern. Small ranches, isolated owners, financial difficulty. They bring documents often to men who are ill or frightened or simply alone. They get signatures. The documents aren't always legally sound, but by the time anyone finds out, the owner has either defaulted or been pressured into selling voluntarily." And the contract Cole's father signed, Owen had looked at his notes. "I'm not certain it's enforceable. The signature, your man wasn't present. There are no witnesses listed, and the notarization is," he had paused, "irregular." That's a kind way to put it. Now at the kitchen table with Cole across from her and Mrs. Reyes refilling their coffee, Vivienne laid out what she knew. The scheme, the Ashford letters, the San Francisco address, the contract, Voss's visit, the pattern Owen had identified. Cole listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. "My father," he said at last, "didn't know what he was signing. I think it's likely he didn't fully understand it, no. He was ill, he was alone, and Gerald Voss Harlan's father had been presenting himself as a potential ally for years. And the contract. Owen believes it's not legally enforceable. The absence of proper witnesses, the notarization issues." She paused. "But Harlan Voss almost certainly knows this. He has lawyers. He would have had this reviewed." She met Cole's eyes. "I think he's been using it as a psychological tool to make you feel that your father's legacy is compromised, that the ground under the ranch isn't solid." Cole was very still. "He wanted you to feel," Vivienne said carefully, "that your father had sold you." The silence lasted a long time. "He didn't," Cole said. His voice was quiet. But something in it had shifted, not dramatically, not in a way that required witnessing. Simply shifted the way a bone sets when it has been out of place for a long time. She watched it happen in his face, and she understood that this was the thing that had needed to happen, and that she was glad she had been the one to give it to him. "He didn't," she agreed. "He was a frightened man who was manipulated by someone who was practiced at manipulating frightened men. That is not the same thing." Cole looked at the kitchen table for a moment. Then he looked at her. "After we're married," he said, "I want to write to my father's grave. Figuratively, I want to do something that acknowledges that I understand what he was trying to build, what he was trying to teach me." He paused. Does that sound foolish? It sounds like something your mother would have said you needed to do, Vivienne said. Something in his face broke open and healed in the same instant. Yes, he said. I suppose it does, Miss Reyes set down the coffee pot and walked out of the kitchen without a word, which was her way of allowing people their moments without abandoning her post. Sinclair arrived on a Wednesday 6 days before the wedding. Her carriage was far too elegant for the ranch road. The springs showed it, the driver's expression showed it, and Boss Sinclair herself showed it in the precise tightening of her jaw as the wheels found yet another rut. She emerged onto the sun-baked yard with the careful dignity of a woman who had made it a lifelong practice to appear unruffled by circumstances she privately found intolerable. She was exactly as Vivienne remembered her, tall and severe, silver-haired, dressed in the particular shade of dark that wasn't quite mourning, but conveyed a permanent readiness for it. Her eyes found Vivienne, immediately took in the sun-darkened face, the work-worn dress, the absence of any of the careful markers of Boston respectability, and did not trouble to conceal what they found. Vivienne Hartwell, she said, I've been searching for you for months. Vivienne had been in the garden with Mrs. Reyes. She set down the basket of tomatoes she was holding and straightened her back. She had known this was coming, had known it in some way since October had prepared for it in the abstract. The abstract she was discovering was insufficient preparation. Mrs. Sinclair, she said, this is unexpected. I should think so. The headmistress's gaze swept the yard, the barn, the cattle in the far pasture, Cole's work shirt airing on the porch rail, the humble evidence of a life that bore no resemblance to any of the careful futures she had mapped for her students. When you disappeared from Boston with nothing more than a vague letter about California, there were people who were concerned. I sent a letter that said you'd found a position. Nothing more. The disapproval in her voice was thorough and architectural. Nothing about living unmarried on a ranch with a man working like a... Careful, and as Rosie Reyes said pleasantly from beside Vivienne. Her voice was mild, and her expression was serene, and there was underneath both the quality of a woman who had outlasted a great many people who thought they could determine the terms. I'm not living here unmarried, Vivienne said. Cole and I are to be married this Saturday. Mrs. Sinclair's silence had the particular texture of recalibrating. Married, she said, to him. To Mr. Cole Merritt, yes. Vivienne heard her own voice with mild surprise, level clear entirely without the defensive flutter she had been bracing for. He is a good man, an honest man, and my equal partner in every sense that matters. This is my home. This is my life. If you've come to dissuade me from it, you have made a very long trip for nothing. Cole came out of the barn, then drawn Vivienne supposed by the sound of an unfamiliar carriage. He removed his hat and crossed the yard with the unhurried propriety of a man who was on his own land. Ma'am, he said, Cole Merritt. Mrs. Sinclair looked him up and down in the thorough, uncharitable way she had always assessed anything that deviated from her expectations. I know who you are, she said. I've come to speak with my former student. You're welcome to speak with her, Cole said. She's right here. He came to stand beside Vivienne, not in front of her, not between her and the headmistress. Beside her. The precise geometry of it was not lost on anyone. Mrs. Sinclair turned back to Vivienne. Your aunt, she said, spent years and considerable resources ensuring your education. The position at the academy. Was charity, Vivienne said. You made that clear at the time. A flicker in the older woman's expression. It was an opportunity. It was a cage, a kinder cage than the one I was in before it, but a cage. Vivienne looked at her steadily. Mrs. Sinclair, I understand that you came here out of what you believe is concern, but I need you to understand something. You know about the scheme that brought me here. The false position, the letters. A pause. Something moved in Mrs. Sinclair's face, small, quickly controlled. Vivienne felt it like a cold hand on her spine. You knew, she said. The silence lasted 3 seconds. 3 seconds in which Mrs. Sinclair's composure held perfectly and in which every second of that composure confirmed the truth. You knew I had been deceived, Vivienne said. Before I left Boston, you knew there was no Mrs. Ashford, or you suspected or someone told you. And you said nothing. I didn't know. You suspected. That's worse in some ways. Vivienne felt something rise in her that was not the grief she had been expecting, but something cleaner and hotter, the appropriate anger of someone who has finally named a thing that has been nameless for too long. You thought California would teach me a lesson about ambition, about knowing my place, about what women like me, poor relations, scholarship girls, the charity cases were allowed to want. Her voice was steady. She was surprised by how steady it was. You let me walk into it. Mrs. Sinclair's composure had cracked in one small place, a slight whitening around her mouth. I didn't arrange the scheme, Vivienne. I want to be clear about that. I heard there were rumors about certain employment advertisements that were not. I should have spoken to you. I acknowledge that. Yes, you should have. But the reason I didn't, I don't need the reason, Vivienne said. I need you to understand the consequence. The consequence was that I arrived in a strange town with 17 cents and no plan. The consequence was also. She paused, looking at the valley, at the green hills, at the ranch, at Cole standing beside her, that I am here, which is the only place in retrospect that I was ever going to be myself. Mrs. Sinclair looked at her for a long moment. You've changed, she said finally. Yes. I'm not certain it's the change I would have chosen for you. No. Vivienne met her eyes. That's rather the point. Mrs. Sinclair gathered herself, the precise, practiced gathering of a woman who had spent 40 years never being seen to be affected, and turned toward her carriage. The consequences of your choices are your own, she said. I have done my duty. She stopped at the carriage step. Your aunt, she said without turning, wanted you to be happy. That was her primary instruction to me when she was dying. See that she's happy, Edith. She's never been allowed to be happy. I have not always. A pause, the smallest breath. I hope this is what she meant. She got into the carriage, the driver clicked to the horses, the carriage moved down the road, and Vivienne watched it go and felt not the lightness of something resolved, but the more complicated thing, the weight of an old wound being set down at last. It would not stop aching immediately, but it was set down. Cole's hand found her shoulder. Are you all right? He asked quietly. She considered this. Yes, she said. I think I am, actually. She looked at him. She knew. Before I left, she suspected the scheme and said nothing. I know. And she searched. I'm not destroyed by that. I thought I would be, but what I actually feel is, she looked at the road where the carriage had been finished, with that chapter. It was a long chapter. It was. She looked back at the ranch. The garden she and Mrs. Reyes had spent weeks extending, the repaired fences, the fuller creek, the cattle grazing in the green pasture. This chapter is better. It gets better every day, Cole said. Mrs. Reyes appeared in the doorway behind them. The seamstress from Santa Barbara arrived this morning, she announced. The dress needs its final fitting. Come inside. A pause. Cole, you have fences to check. Don't know. The dress was ivory silk, simply cut with lace at the collar and cuffs. The Santa Barbara seamstress, a small, serious woman who communicated primarily through pins, had constructed it from Vivienne's measurements, in 3 letters of description, and it was, Vivienne thought, looking at herself in the small mirror, the most beautiful thing she had ever worn. It was also entirely unlike anything she had worn before. No stiff Boston propriety in it, no performance. Just a dress for a woman who had made a choice on a California morning in spring to marry the person she loved in the valley she had made her home. Mrs. Reyes stood behind her, adjusting the hem with steady hands. Stop fidgeting, she said. I'm not fidgeting. You're about to. Vivienne was still. He's going to forget how to talk when he sees you, Mrs. Reyes said. This was coming from her, the highest possible compliment. He'll stand there like a man who's been hit on the head and forgotten all the words. That's not particularly useful at a wedding ceremony. He'll remember the important ones. Mrs. Reyes smoothed the fabric at Vivienne's shoulder. Her hands were gentle in a way they were never conspicuously gentle. You're a good match, she said. Not because you're alike, because you're fitted, like pieces of something that was always supposed to be one thing. Vivienne looked at herself in the mirror, at the woman who had arrived in this valley 8 months ago, with 17 cents and a leather-bound novel and a particular quality of stubborn practicality that had, against all reasonable expectation, turned out to be exactly what was needed. Mrs. Reyes, she said quietly, thank you for the room, for showing me how the house worked, she paused, for saying nothing obvious when it needed to remain unspoken. Mrs. Reyes made a small, dismissive sound that conveyed a great deal of warmth. Thank you, she said, and said nothing else, and went back to the hymn. The night before the wedding, Vivienne could not sleep. She got up quietly, wrapped herself in her shawl, and went out to the porch. The spring night was cool and clear. The valley lay below her in moonlight, the creek catching it and breaking it into small silver pieces. The hills were dark and generous, against the sky thick with stars. Not Boston's thin scatter cautiously permitted by the city light, but the real thing, the comprehensive thing, the sky as it actually was when nothing stood between a person and it. She heard boots on the far side of the porch. Bad luck, she said, is for the wedding day itself. We still have a few hours. Cole came around the corner and leaned on the railing beside her. He had not been sleeping either. She could tell from the particular alertness of his stillness, the way he wasn't trying to be quiet. Having second thoughts, he asked. None, are you? Not a single one. He looked out at the valley. I've been trying to figure out how to say something and I haven't found the right words yet. Say it imperfectly. All right. He turned to look at Asher. When I saw you on that bench, I told myself I was just doing what any decent person would do, helping someone in trouble. I believed that for about 2 weeks. He paused. Then you organized my study and wrote a letter that made my most hostile creditor call me sir, and I stopped believing it. She laughed softly. What I want to say, he continued more quietly, is that you didn't need me. You would have figured it out. You're the kind of person who figures things out. It's written into how you work, how you think, how you're built. He looked at her steadily. I want you to know that I know that. I didn't save you. I was in the right place when you needed a first step. Everything after that was you. Vivienne was quiet for a moment. That's not entirely true, she said. I needed someone to see me clearly enough to make the offer. Most people who looked at me on that bench saw a problem to be solved or a charity to be dispensed. You saw, she paused. You saw someone who could be useful, someone with capabilities. That's not a small thing, Cole. That was everything. He was looking at her in the moonlight with that expression she had slowly learned to receive without deflecting. We saved each other, she said. Different things, different ways, but that's what happened. That's what happened, he agreed. He took her hand, and they stood together on the porch while the valley breathed below them, and the stars turned their slow arc overhead, talking about the future the way you talk about a thing you have every reason to believe in, not with the frantic energy of hope, but with the steady confidence of a plan well made and well begun. The wedding took place under the oak trees. The whole of Ventura came, or so it seemed, Mrs. Liang in her best dress, Mr. Doyle from the bank standing stiffly but not unkindly beside the hardware merchant and his wife, the 2 older miners from Mrs. Liang's boarding house, the young couple who had barely looked old enough to be married when Vivienne first arrived, now apparently the parents of a new baby wrapped in a wool blanket against the spring morning. Owen Marsh came with a new suit that was slightly too large and an expression of authentic happiness. Raphael and Danny stood with Cole as the morning sun came through the oaks in long golden bars. Vivienne walked down the makeshift aisle alone. She had no father to give her away, no family connections to honor with their presence. She walked the length of the aisle between the rows of wooden chairs that Raphael had arranged from the barn storage, and she felt each step with the particular attention of someone who understands they are walking somewhere permanent. Cole's face when she reached him was exactly what Mrs. Reyes had predicted, a man struck clean of words, all his quiet, careful competence temporarily unavailable to him. His eyes were bright. His hands, when he took hers, were steady. You're here, he said quietly. Just that. I'm here, she said. The minister, a patient, plain-spoken man from the Presbyterian Church on Oak Street, performed a ceremony that was short and unadorned and entirely sufficient. When he asked if anyone objected, the silence was the particular silence of a community that has already decided. I do, Cole said. I do, Vivienne said. The kiss was sweet and unhurried and witnessed by every person in Ventura who had watched these 2 people figure out what they were to each other over the course of one very eventful year. The cheering was substantial. Note, The celebration went until the stars came out. Mrs. Liang's cake was declared by general consensus to be the finest cake Ventura had produced in living memory. Raphael played guitar with an intensity that suggested he had been waiting for an occasion worthy of his full ability. Danny sang beautifully and without apparent self-consciousness. Mr. Doyle danced with Mrs. Reyes, both of them pretending not to enjoy it and failing entirely. Cole pulled Vivienne away from the celebration once briefly while the dancing was still going and the lanterns were still lit. They stood for a moment at the edge of the lamplight, looking out at the dark valley. "Happy?" he asked. She considered the question honestly, which was the only way she had ever been able to answer him. "I'm going to need a larger word," she said. "Happy isn't quite the right size." He laughed. "When I was sitting on that bench," she said, "I thought my life was ending. I thought the decent part was over the hopeful part. I thought whatever came next would just be surviving." She looked at the lit yard, the dancing figures, the valley beyond. "I had no idea the bench was the beginning." "Best bench I ever passed," he said. She turned to look at him, at this man who had asked one simple question on a darkening California evening and had stood beside her through everything that followed. "You asked where I was headed. You said you didn't know." "I didn't." She looked at the valley. "I was headed here. I just didn't know it yet." He pressed a kiss to her temple. She leaned into him. They stayed there a moment longer, just a moment, just enough, and then Mrs. Reyes's voice carried across the yard with the kind of projection that a lifetime of managing a large household produces. "Are you two going to stand in the dark or come and have cake?" They went and had cake. The months after the wedding settled into the life Vivienne had been building toward without knowing she was building toward it. She moved from the small room off the kitchen to the bedroom at the end of the hall. The ranch's accounts moved from managed to profitable. The spring cattle sale paid the next installment on the bank loan with enough left over to fund the fence repairs and begin tentatively, carefully planning for expansion. The battle with Harlan Voss was not finished. Through the summer, the pressure came in the ways they had anticipated and some they had not. The fence cut in the night. 50 head found on Voss's newly purchased land, his foreman demanding payment for trespass. The well poisoned something dark and foul in the water one morning that required a new well at a cost they could not easily absorb. "Someone's inside the operation," Raphael said the morning of the well. His face was careful. "One of the seasonal men." "Danny checked the new one," Cole said. "He's clean." "The one Voss's foreman hired away in March," Vivienne said. "He knew about the well location. He knew about the fence rotation." They made lists. They documented everything, every incident, every cost, every date and description and witness assembled into the meticulous record of a woman who understood that evidence was more durable than anger. Owen Marsh received these reports and added them to a file that was growing systematically into something that could be used. When Voss purchased the banknote from Mr. Doyle, who was retiring genuinely this time and returning to Pennsylvania, Vivienne read the transfer notice 3 times and then made herself a cup of tea and sat down to think. The threat was clear. Voss held the debt now. He could theoretically call it due. If they couldn't pay the full amount, and they couldn't not yet, they would be forced to sell. She read the original loan document through the night. Cole found her at the desk at 3 in the morning, a candle burning low papers spread around her in the organized chaos of deep work. "Come to bed," he said. "In a moment. I'm close to something." He brought her tea without being asked and sat in the other chair and waited because he understood by now the quality of her concentration when she was close to something, and he had learned not to interrupt it. At 4 in the morning, she found it. "Here," she said, her finger on a clause midway through the 3rd page. "The debt can be called due, but only in the event of default, and we have to be notified 30 days prior with an opportunity to cure." She looked up at him. Her eyes were tired and very bright. "We're not in default, Cole. We've made every payment ahead of schedule. Voss can threaten, he can bluster. But if he tries to foreclose without proper grounds, he's exposing himself to a lawsuit." Cole read the clause. "Owen," he said. "First thing in the morning." Owen Marsh, presented with the documentation the next morning, read it with the focused attention of a young lawyer who has just been handed the thing he needed. "She's right," he said. He looked at Vivienne with the expression of a man revising an already high estimate upward. "Voss is bluffing, and if he pushes it," he picked up his pen, "we don't just defend, we attack." The letter Owen sent to Voss's lawyers was a masterpiece of controlled legal precision. It named every documented incident of sabotage. It cited the relevant clauses of the loan agreement. It noted the irregularities in the contract Voss held from Cole's father and raised the question of whether the acquisition of that document had involved any form of fraud or elder exploitation. It concluded by expressing the client's hope that the matter could be resolved without further legal proceeding, while making clear that such proceeding was entirely prepared for. Voss appeared at the ranch himself 3 days later. He came without the carriage, this time a single horse, a single rider, the carefully assembled ease of a man who has decided on a different approach. He was, Vivienne noted, slightly less smooth than he had been in the spring. Something around his eyes. Cole met him in the yard. Vivienne came down from the porch and stood beside him. "You've been advised by a lawyer," Voss said. "We have a lawyer," Cole said. "We've had one since the fall." Voss looked at Vivienne. The calculating assessment was still there, but something in it had shifted, recalibrated, she thought, toward an opponent he had underestimated. "You understand," he said to her directly, "that I have resources you can't match. Legal, financial, political. This, a gesture at the ranch, is a very small operation to be fighting a very large one." "Yes," Vivienne said. She looked at him with the same steadiness she had used on demanding creditors and on Mrs. Sinclair and on the bench at the Ventura station when she had decided at the end of one very long day not to give in to fear. "I understand that completely. I also understand that every single thing you have done to this ranch since July has been documented, dated, witnessed where possible, and filed with our lawyer. I understand that the contract you hold from Mr. Merritt's father is legally questionable, and that the circumstances of its signing may constitute fraud." She paused. "I also understand that your partners in San Francisco don't know how you've been using their capital. That is not a permanent situation." Something moved in Voss's face. "You've been thorough," he said. "I keep accounts," Vivienne said. "It's what I do." Voss looked at Cole. Whatever calculation he performed in that moment, its result was visible in the slight shift of his posture. "I'll be in touch," he said. "Through our lawyer," Cole said pleasantly. Voss rode back down the road and they stood watching until the dust settled. Raphael came out of the barn and stood beside them, shaking his head slowly. "Mrs. Merritt," he said, "you have more nerve than any man I have ever met." "Less nerve than it looked," Vivienne said honestly. "My hands are shaking." Cole took her hand. "Mine too," he said quietly. The crisis in San Francisco, when it came faster than any of them had expected. Owen appeared at the ranch on a Tuesday in early October, his new suit slightly less new than it had been, carrying a briefcase and an expression of barely contained satisfaction. "Voss's partners," he said, accepting coffee from Mrs. Reyes and sitting at the kitchen table, "have discovered that their capital has been funding personal land acquisitions without their knowledge or consent. The accounts are frozen pending investigation. All of his pending legal actions are suspended. His assets in California are in escrow." Cole looked at Vivienne. "The bank note," she said, "tied up in the proceedings. He can't act on it, can't sell it, can't enforce it." Owen opened his briefcase. "From the documents I've been able to review, several of his other acquisitions are also being contested. There are about 14 properties in 3 counties where the sellers are coming forward now that his backing has collapsed." He looked at them both over the rim of his coffee cup. "He'll be in litigation for years. He won't be purchasing anything else in this valley." The silence that followed lasted a comfortable while. Then Mrs. Reyes at the stove made a sound that was not words, but said everything. After Owen left, after the handshakes and the carefully restrained celebration, and the agreement to continue documenting everything just in case Cole and Vivienne sat on the porch steps in the October afternoon, Mrs. Reyes brought 2 cups of coffee and returned inside without a word. The valley below was golden again, not the desperate gold of drought, but the rich gold of autumn, the hills full and heavy with the late-season gruntsum. The cattle were fat this year. The creek ran with good authority. The new fence along the south pasture stood straight. They sat in silence for a while. "You could have left," Cole said. "When Voss made it clear he was going to use you as a lever, you had grounds. Nobody would have blamed you." Vivienne looked at the coffee in her hands. "I already left once," she said. "Boston. I spent years there being the person everyone needed me to be in order to be tolerated. When I finally left, it wasn't brave. It was just the only thing left. She turned to look at him. Here I stayed because I wanted to, because this is mine. The work is mine and the ranch is mine, and she paused. You are mine. A small smile at the edge of her mouth, in the appropriate legal and spiritual senses. Both, he confirmed. I stayed because leaving would have been the wrong thing, she said simply. Sometimes you know the difference. Cole put his hand over hers on the step. They sat there until the sun began its descent behind the western hills and the valley turned that particular shade of rose gold that Vivienne had first noticed from the train station bench and had been noticing with increasing love ever since. The spring brought Nora. She arrived in February, early, impatient, entirely in character, with what she would later prove to be arriving so quickly that Raphael had to ride for the doctor at a gallop, and Mrs. Reyes managed the first 20 minutes with complete authority and very little visible anxiety. Cole did not wait downstairs. I'm not leaving, he told Mrs. Reyes with the flat finality of a man who has made a decision that is not subject to revision. We're partners. That means I'm here for this. Mrs. Reyes looked at him for a long moment. Don't faint, she said. I won't faint. Men always say that. He stayed. He was present for every moment of the long, fierce, extraordinary work of it, holding Vivienne's hand while she crushed his speaking quietly, when she needed to hear his voice staying out of the way, with perfect timing when Mrs. Reyes and the doctor needed the space. And then a cry. The specific, indignant, world-claiming cry of a new person encountering air for the first time. A girl, Dr. Morrison said. Cole made a sound, a single involuntary sound that Vivienne had never heard from him before. Not words, just the raw, unmediated expression of a man who has just been surprised by the full size of joy. Nora, Vivienne said when they placed her on her chest. She said it with the certainty of someone who has known the answer before the question was asked. Cole sat on the edge of the bed and looked at his daughter. He looked at his wife. Nora Rose Merritt, he said. It came out slightly unsteady. After your mother. Vivienne looked at him. You remembered. You told me once that your mother and father loved each other the way people only love when they know it won't last long enough. His voice was careful with the emotion in it. I thought she deserved to carry that. Vivienne did not trust herself to speak. She laid her hand over Cole's on the blanket. Nora's tiny fingers moving in that unfocused, exploratory way of new beings found Vivienne's finger and wrapped around it. The three of them stayed that way while Mrs. Reyes in the doorway quietly announced to the empty hallway that she had told everyone this was going to happen and that she expected them to remember it. The letter from Mrs. Sinclair's attorney arrived in late summer when Nora was 6 months old and beginning to demonstrate a personality that combined Cole's directness with Vivienne's stubbornness in ways that Mrs. Reyes found highly entertaining. Vivienne read it in the study while Nora slept in the small cradle they had moved in there so that she could work without losing track of her. Mrs. Edith Sinclair had died in April quietly in the Boston house where she had lived for 40 years. She had left Vivienne a modest sum, not large but not insignificant, in a letter written in the weeks before she died in the careful hand of a woman who had spent a lifetime teaching other people to express themselves clearly and had found it at the end not easy. Dear Vivienne, I have written this letter 4 times. The previous versions were better argued. I have kept this one because it is more honest. I knew about the Ashford scheme. I had heard it discussed at a dinner in Boston I should not have attended, and from people whose company I should not have sought. I knew it preyed on educated women with few options. I knew the name of the man behind it, though I did not know his son would come to your particular valley. I said nothing because I thought California would teach you what I had failed to teach you at the academy, that the world was not designed for women like you, and that ambition without security was its own form of recklessness. I believed I was being realistic. I believed realism was kindness. I was wrong. What I was being was afraid that I had failed you. Afraid that your particular qualities would take you somewhere I couldn't follow, afraid most of all that you would find a life I hadn't thought to show you was possible. Your aunt loved you very much. She asked me when she was dying to see that you were happy. She used that word specifically. Happy, not safe, not suitable, not provided for. Happy. I hope you are. From what I have heard, and there are people in Ventura who write letters, and some of those letters reach Boston, I believe you are. I am sorry I did not tell you. I am sorrier that it took me this long to say so. With genuine regard, Edith Sinclair. Vivienne read the letter twice. Then she folded it carefully and sat for a moment in the study in the quiet of the afternoon, with Nora breathing softly in the cradle beside her, and the sound of Cole working somewhere outside, the regular sound of a man comfortable in his own life. She felt the old wound, the years of being the charity case, the poor relation, the girl too capable for the box she'd been placed in, and she felt it without the urgency it used to carry. It was still there. Some wounds were like that, but it had lost its power to determine anything. She took the wooden box Cole had made her, the inlaid one given on their first Christmas, for keeping important documents, and she placed the letter inside it between the ranch's title deed and the partnership agreement they had drawn up with Owen Marsh. She closed the lid. She went to the window. Cole was in the far pasture with Raphael checking the south fence line. Even from this distance, she could read his posture, the ease of a man in his own country, the slight attention he gave to the land beneath his feet. That was not anxiety, but investment. He looked up as though he had felt her watching and raised a hand. She raised hers. Nora stirred in the cradle and made the particular small sound that meant she was waking. Not crying, just announcing her return to consciousness the way she always did, with the confidence of someone who has never been given reason to doubt she would be attended to. Vivienne went to her. She lifted her daughter and stood at the window, holding her against her shoulder, looking out at the valley, the creek in the afternoon light, the green hills, the cattle in the far pasture. The man who had asked her a question on a darkening October evening and had not walked away when she couldn't answer it. "You are going to inherit all of this," she told Nora in a conversational tone, as though narrating the scene to an interested party. "The accounts and the records and the letters and the fences, the difficult creditors and the good lawyers, the creek when it's full and the creek when it's dry." She looked at the valley. "But more than that, you're going to inherit the idea that you can be useful and valued and loved all at once, that those things are not in competition." She paused. "Your grandmother believed that. It took me 24 years and 17 cents in a train bench in Ventura to understand it myself." Nora, who was 6 months old and had no opinion yet about the philosophical implications of love and capability, expressed herself by grabbing a fistful of Vivienne's hair. Vivienne laughed. Cole came in at supper, dusty from the fence work, and washed at the pump, and came to the kitchen, where Mrs. Reyes was heating the evening meal, and Vivienne was settling Nora in the high chair they had constructed from plans in a borrowed carpenter's manual. He took his place at the table. He accepted the coffee Vivienne handed him. He looked at the kitchen, at the 3 women in various stages of managing the evening, at the warm disorder of a house that was thoroughly uncomplicatedly lived in. "Good day," Vivienne asked. "South fence is solid. Raphael thinks the north section needs work before winter." He looked at her. I received a letter from Mrs. Sinclair's attorney." She set her coffee down. "She left me something, and a letter." "What did it say?" "That she was sorry, that she knew before I left Boston about the scheme, that she thought California would teach me to be less ambitious." Vivienne looked at him steadily. "And that she hoped I was happy." Cole was quiet for a moment. "Are you?" he asked. It was the same question he had asked on their wedding night in the lantern light, with the valley all around them. She had said she needed a larger word. She had one now. "I'm home," she said. "That's bigger than happy." He reached across the table and took her hand. Mrs. Reyes passed the bread and made a sound that was not quite words. Nora banged a small fist on the tray of the high chair with the decisive authority of a person who has opinions about the pace of supper. Outside, the October evening was deepening into the particular blue of California dusk. Not the blue of Boston's hemmed and careful skies, but the wide, unpromising, generous blue of a sky that went on forever and was only beginning. Vivienne looked at it through the kitchen window with her husband's hand warm in hers, and her daughter banging the table and the smell of Mrs. Reyes's cooking filling the house, and felt not the fragile, tentative thing that hope had been on the train station bench, not the cautious optimism of the first months at the ranch, but the solid-rooted daily thing that comes when you have built a life on ground that is genuinely yours. She was where she was headed. She had been headed here all along. If this story moved you, if Vivienne's journey from a train station bench to the valley she made her home spoke to something in you, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. We tell stories like this every week. Stories about courage and second chances and the quiet, stubborn work of building something real. Leave a comment and tell me where in the world you're listening from. Tell me about a time you arrived somewhere with nothing and discovered it was exactly where you needed to be. I read every comment. I mean that. And to those of you who have been on your own train station bench, who have sat somewhere with very little and nowhere obvious to go, this story is for you. The question is still out there. The cowboy with the storm-colored eyes is still out there. Where are you headed? Sometimes the honest answer, the best answer is, I don't know yet. That's how every good story starts. Until next time.